One important concept that RESTful APIs they talk about is that everything on the internet is a resource. And to access a resource, we use a URL or a URI, Uniform Resource Identifier. Everything on the internet, say a university, a course, a student, right? They are all a resource. And using a university website, if you say that, hey, give me student, it is with the HTTP get verb, it is going to give you a list of all these students. If you bind an ID property here, it is going to come back with list of all these students. I'm so sorry, an individual student. If you want to make any modification, you're going to change the verb, and that verb is going to provide the next action. But this is not enough. Uh, RESTful APIs, they are more like a website, right? Because they work on HTTP. I'm going to once again go back to our favorite website, Amazon.com, and notice that when I entered the URL, I had no clue as to what response is going to come back, right? I didn't know that they're going to show me a list of these products. I didn't know that I'll be able to log in to my account. I didn't know that there is something called as today's deals through which I can interact with more elements. And if I didn't know that I can add elements to my shopping cart. So when I enter a URL, it comes back with a response, right? That is the HTTP GET request that gets sent to server, and the server came back with everything that I can do on the system. So it came back with a lot of text, a lot of images, but it also gave me an option of navigating around the site itself, right? When we build RESTful services, we are a student is a resource, but then when we interact with this resource, there are other avenues that should open up, right? We and that is uh, a nice way of developing RESTful APIs. What we have done so far is we provided a couple of verbs like HTTP get, post, and say put and delete. Right? With HTTP get, we were simply receiving a model of the student. Right? With post, we were sending a model, and then that element was getting saved. The basic operation that we were doing here was CRUD, create, to reads, update, and delete. But then once we are once we send that request, the operation was happening at the server in a silo, and then we had no clue as to what happened to that request. I mean, it would pass because you would receive an HTTP status code 200, 300, 400, 500, and we would know what happened to the request that we sent. But how do we access that student, that information that we created? It was not becoming very visible. And to identify that, there are uh, there are levels at which you do RESTful application development. Level 0 is what we were doing so far. We were doing CRUD operation. We were posting data to the server and we were reading data from the server. Right? So if you remember from our example yesterday, the MVC application, it was using only two verbs, HTTP GET and HTTP POST. Even when we wanted to delete a record of a student, the URL that was the HTTP verb that was going to the delete URL was post itself, because the post had an ID with it, and with that ID we identified the resource on the server side and we deleted that resource. So most of the time we were sticking to these two verbs. Level 1 says that we are not going to use only two verbs, we are going to rely mono verbs. And this is when our URL started changing from, say, index. So over here we had index and we had delete student, right? And then probably there was a create and there was edit. At level 1, we started with the Web API project. We started using get, post, put, and delete. And then our URL or the action name itself, it was independent. We didn't care what the action name is because it was built around the HTTP verbs. So this is level number 1. Then there is a third level. I'm so sorry. There are two more levels. Level 2 is just 1 second. All right. So I got a little confused. What we have discussed here is applicable to level 2. That when we start relying on the HTTP verbs, we are actually doing level 2. In level 1, we are going to rely on resources. And then resource is a student. Resource is a course. The the entities that we are saving on the server side with which we want to interact through our service becomes a resource, and it is on this resource that we perform direct actions. So if you want to modify a student, you are once again going to post an entity of the student, and it'll be received to the server end and it's going to perform that action. With level 2, we are going to migrate towards using HTTP verbs in a better way, and each verb is going to do the action. So our URLs, they are going to improve a little, and with HTTP say delete, right, we will be able to delete a student. Level 3 is called the word is HATEOAS. It stands for hypertext as the engine of application state. Okay, so in this state, our web API, they are gonna they're gonna feel and behave like we are interacting with a website, right? So when I enter a URL, amazon.in, amazon.com, it is going to come back with a lot of data, right? The images, this text here, and it is going to come back with a lot of links. So if I hover on these objects, these are links, and this website is kind of driving my behavior or my options that I can perform with this particular application, right? So in level 3, in the most mature implementation of a web API, we are not going to return data. We are not going to expose only these 4 or 5 operations, get, put, post, and delete. We are going to let the consumers interact with our website. And with this, let's jump into our demo. I'm going to stop this and close out of all of this. Close all the tabs, don't save anything. And I'm going to get rid of the weather forecast API itself. Right. Let's go ahead and add a model. I'm going to call it student, and let's add a couple of fields here. Right now, I didn't mean to put it in the controller. I'm going to fix the namespace as well, and I'm going to add a student controller. Then, because we don't have entity framework, I'm going to choose the second option, the add button. We'll call it student controller, and Okay, another mistake. I didn't mean to add the web app controller. I wanted to add an API controller. Right. So an API controller with read write action, because we are not doing databases today. I'm going to call it student controller and hit the OK button. Notice that it is inheriting from controller base and it is modified with API controller, and the route itself is API slash controller slash the controller attribute. So whatever the controller name is, it is going to pick up that, and to access this, we're going to hit API slash student. Now it has multiple methods: get, to implementation of get, post, put, and delete. If we execute this, a console customer server has started. It launched the Swagger as the default entry point, and notice that it has all 5 actions defined here: one with student, and second with student with an ID, and put, post, and delete these 5 actions. There is another URL that I think I should show you. I think it's called, yeah, with the version number and then swagger.json. If I hit enter here, notice that it is the same XML documentation that we were trying to generate some time back in the Swagger editor. Over here, it started with OpenAPI 303. This one is OpenAPI 301. The information. This is coming out as a JSON document. What we were building here was a YAML document. Notice that there are subtle differences. There are not as many parentheses, right, as in the JSON document. So there is a path element. If I collapse the path element, there is a components element, and because we don't have any specific model type defined, we are only relying on native types. Our component section is empty, and inside get, post, then another get, it matches the order of the index.html implementation that we saw. So it is this JSON object that is generated, and this JSON object is represented here in the UI friendly way, right? What we want to look at is the student API. If I hit API slash student, it's going to come back with 2 values, value 1 and value 2. This is level 0 because we are simply taking a request and we are returning that response. Now, if I want to interact with student, I can come here and modify those values, send those values as object, and it's going to become the response. But I don't want to deal with string to begin with. I want to use the student model, and I'm going to return a collection of student over here. And let's quickly create a couple of students here. New student. The first name is goes ID. This one. So with this created, the pink or purple squiggly indicates that the code is not compiled. I'm going to stop that. It will disappear. And let's go ahead and delete the rest of the actions. Now if I hit 5, I can change the URL now. If I now open up the page, it is going to display this particular element that we are passing. But then this is plain response that we are receiving, and then it is like very one-way interaction. Now I'm going to pull out this collection. I'm going to create a new class and I'm going to call it student repository. Repository is an in-memory collection. So I'm going to create a property here. I'm going to definitely return an enumerable of student. And when somebody says that, hey, give me a list of students, we are the get method, we are going to return, we copy it there. Alright, so our student repository has one property called student, and we are going to use this repository inside this collection. So where repository assigned to new student repository, like so. And over here, we're simply going to return repository dot students, and the behavior of the application will stay the same. We are still going to get the same response. What we want is we want to get to this point. We want to return some data, and we want to return the actions or the activities that we can perform on that data. And to do that, we're going to have to change the way we are returning this response. And for that, we are going to create a couple of more classes. I'm going to change this. The first class I'm going to call is a response itself, and I'm going to add a property over here, and I'm going to make it a generic type t, and I'm going to use that type over here, and I'm going to call this member as value. So I've created a new class called response, and this response is going to have a value of whatever type I want to pass. With this, if I want to change my API, I can come to the student controller, and instead of the repository object directly, I'm going to create a response object, and this response object is going to be new response of type. Because I'm returning a collection, I'm going to pick up this thing, paste it here, and put it in parentheses. So I have a response object. I'll have to modify the return type from int variable of student to response of this particular type. Right? Now I can do this response dot value assigned to, okay, need that repository anyway. Repository assigned to new student repository. I'm going to do a repository dot students. Right? So nothing changed so far. Instead of returning int variable, I'm returning a response. So it's going to be a return response. So now if I run the application, API/student page, it is, instead of giving a direct collection, it is giving me an object, and that object has one member called value. Make sense? Let's go ahead, and we have solved part of the problem. We have solved the response or the data that we want to return. The second part is a little tricky. In the second part, we want to send it the bunch of URLs that you can interact with once you get on that page. For that, we are going to add a new type, and that type I'm going to call it a link. Now, if you let's go back to these elements, hit F12 and pick up some URL. Now notice that there's an A element. Let's go ahead and copy the element, and we're going to look at it in a text editor. So a link is an anchor tag. An anchor tag has the first element as href, which is going to point to a resource. Then it has some styling element through classes, and it has some text to it. Let's look at another element, another link element. I'm going to scroll all the way to the top, and inside HTML, inside head, in the HTML section, HTML classes, we have seen something called as link. And then let's go ahead and copy this as well, the element. So this link has a relation and an href. Right? And href, once again, is going to point to some resource on the internet, and the relation itself is going to define what this link here indicates. We have seen examples where we had text/javascript or text/style sheet, right, for linking CSS file. So this relation attribute is important when you want to provide some form of link. In our link class, we are going to have those properties as well. I'm going to have a property string. I'm going to call it href. I'm going to add another property string, and I'm going to call it relation. All right. Just one second. There's a third element that is needed. Yeah. All right. So that element was a little tricky. I forgot that. And then that element is the method. Right? Because we are in the web API world, and because we have already crossed these two levels, these three levels, right? We don't want to return a plain object as a response and let the consumers of the API guess what is the next action possible on the resources that we are interacting with. We are at the highest level of developing web applications, so we'll tell them that how do you want to invoke this particular href, right? So I'm going to save this, and in this response we want to add a bunch of those resources, those links. And the way we're going to do that is we're going to create a collection of link, and we're going to call it links. Right? So all I've done is I have added a couple of links. Now let's go back to the controller, and in the controller, in the response object, alongside value, we have an option of adding links, and I'm going to populate that object right here. So I'm going to create var links assigned to new list of link, and let's go ahead and add a couple of links to the application. href, because we are in the university demo, we are going to have students. The method itself is going to be http method dot get, and because I want to save the string value, I'm going to do toString, and the relationship itself is going to be students. Close out this. I'm going to repeat this probably for instructors and also for courses. Now instructors is going to become the relation, and the course here is going to become let me change these to singular. All right. Now if I run the application, and interact with the link, right, I'm getting the regular response, which is similar to getting this response over here. So on the home page, we have received a bunch of values, which is probably this text here. But then along with this value, we found out that there are three more interactions that I can do with this particular API. The first interaction is I can interact with students. The second interaction is the instructor. The third interaction is course, right? And the way to get to a course or a student is to generate a GET request, and in this GET request, I'm going to use this particular URL. Make sense? So we've come a long way from returning a simple student object, right, which was this. It is okay to return this, but then your consumers of the API, they will be clueless as to what happened when you create that student. Let's go ahead and complete a second operation. So in the student controller, we were looking at the get operation so far. Let's go ahead and create another response. And this time, I'm not going to do IEnumerable. I'm only going to do student. And the action itself is going to be post. The name can be absolutely anything because this is web API, and you're going to decorate it with an HTTP verb attribute. So with post, it becomes a post response. And now I can create a response object as new response. And because I'm returning a student information, I'm going to put student as a type. Right? This goes back to our discussion on generics. Right? So the value is going to take type student, and we want to send a couple of links. But first, let's go ahead and run this application. So I'm going to stop this. I'm going to start it. And because it is difficult to do post operation from the browser, we are going to launch Postman. And in Postman, we are going to switch to the post verb. And over here, instead of university, we're going to have student. And in the body part, we can pick up the body from API/student. The body itself is going to look like this. Okay, so we already had it here. And so yesterday we were not able to hit this breakpoint. I'm gonna try my luck one more time. The send button, and we are at the HTTP post. We should have accepted some parameter, but the post request indicates that we want to create a resource. That is not entirely correct, but just for our discussion, we're going to see that post is only for creation of resources. We created a resource, and we want to save that resource on the server side. So when I return a response here, hit F5, okay, it came back with value as nulls and link themselves as null. So our application is working. It is just that because we did not assign any value to it, it came back with all nulls. Let's go ahead and do that next. We already have a repository. Let's make this repository global or singleton. The easy way I'm going to do that is I'm going to add a static keyword over here, and that I'll have to change this to static as well. And I'm going to switch from IEnumerable to IList, and it is complaining about something that it cannot directly convert an array to a list, which is fine. Let's convert this array to a list. It's going to become a new list of student, and it has a get operation. Now, because of post, we are going to create a new student, and we are not accepting any parameter from the request. We're going to ignore that, and we're going to assign first name as X and last name as Y, and say course ID is 20. I want to add this student response to this particular collection here. To do that, I'm going to do student repository dot students, and we got the can simply access the variable now. The class is static, we don't require an instance. The property is also static, we don't require an instance. So that's why there is no new keyword. We assign the value of students to this, and we're going to do very similar thing here. We're going to take the student repository, then we're going to do dot students, and the student that we created here, we're going to add it to this list using the add method. And student, it is going to insert the element into this particular list. With that created, we would want to provide some mechanism of accessing the student itself. And for doing that, we are going to add a couple of links to our response. So the response is going to be response.links, and because it is an INO variable, we are going to do the link operation over here. Links assigned to new list of link, and then the link itself is going to look like this. With href, because we created a student over here, we are going to set it to students slash probably it's a good time that we add an ID property over here. Alright, let's go ahead and make some quick corrections, and we'll change this to 2. So there are 2 students that we have, and in the student controller we added ID 3. The reason I'm doing this is because in the URL I want to use that parameter. So I want to do student.id, and it's going to generate the href with for this particular student. Then I'm going to define the method as, once again, http verb http method dot get dot toString, and then the relationship itself is going to look a little tricky. It's going to be self. Right, so the object that we are returning, if you want to access that object, you are going to go to this URL. What other operations can we perform? We can delete it and we can update it. Okay, so delete is not there, update is probably patch. Once again, not the most accurate definition. Patch is not okay. So let's change this to put, but then put is not for update. Okay, put updates, but then put has a deeper meaning. So the relation is self, and then this relationship is delete, and this relationship is update. Right. Now if I return this response on the post action, let's go back to Postman. We're going to start with the get action. If I hit send here, you're going to come back with two students, student 1 ZK, student 2 AK, and a couple of links. How we can access students, how we can access instructors. And if I click on this link, I didn't know that they were clickable. Right, it went to the students page. Because we don't have action for student, it is going to come back with probably a 404, or probably I have to hit the send button. But this action is not created, so it came back with 404. There's no back button. It opened up in a new tab. And the get action for students, I'll have to append the API keyword here. Check that. Not a plural. Right? So it came back with this particular student. Now we're going to call the post verb on the same URL, And the post verb is going to invoke this function. We already have a breakpoint here. With this end button, it comes inside post. Generally, we're going to accept a parameter, but for our demo, we're going to continue just without a parameter. And we have a response object. This response object is going to need a student. We created the student hard-coded values, and then we added that student to our student collection. With this student added, we wanted to provide a bunch of links that you can do with this student that just got added, right? Those links are added here. If I hover over links and look at these values, it has 3 links, and the first link is students/3, and then it's a get, and the relationship is self. If I hit F5 now, right, because I did not populate the values, it has come out empty, but the link itself is providing us multiple options of how to access that particular resource, right? And we can, our client, the one who is going to consume this API, is going to use this particular link section and is going to interact with the action that we are taking on the site. So once again, to demonstrate what we have done in the API is something that we do on an e-commerce site like Amazon, right? I can probably search for shoes, and then probably I like this shoes here, right? So I didn't know till this point what all options I'm going to come back with. We called the service, we interacted with the service, we performed a post operation. The post operation came back with a bunch of results. The result had values, but then it also gave us options of what you can do with that resource. If I want to see more detail of this particular shoe, I'm going to get a link in the browser, right? When I follow that link, I'll be taken to that particular product. I'm going to see more details, and then I'll also have an option of adding it to cart, right? So each interaction with the website is coming back with the options that are available for that particular interaction. When I click on add to cart, the element is added to my cart, and it is giving me multiple options that now that the element is in your cart, you can do a couple of other things. You can go see what is there in the cart, or you can just buy that element. Now, when I go to cart, I change my mind and I was like, you know what, I'm not happy about it. I don't want that element, right? So it is giving you a nice handy link. It's like, just go ahead and delete it if you don't want it now. That's all right. It is also giving me an option of saving it for later. I did not know that I can do this till I saw this option. So website, they are very smart because they run the entire flow using set of data that they send you, and they also send you the next action that you can take. Right? So when you go to Amazon.com, it comes back with a lot of values and a lot of links. And using those links, we interact with the website. And then we always have an option of completing our flow, our interaction with the website. So if I just delete it, I'm back to square one where we started. And this is what we are also going to do when we design an API, right? It is not a straightforward activity that you come right click and then just choose an API controller. An API controller is going to give you controller base. These APIs, these functions, these methods, they need to be designed. You are going to design an entire flow of what that API is going to provide to its consumers the way this website is created. It has provided you the data and the interaction points. We as API designers, API developers, we are going to provide those interaction points as well. We're going to give them the method, the relation, and the link itself. And we're going to embed this thing into the response object. Now, because this response is going to be tricky, we're going to do a very minute refactoring. I'm going to right click on this and I'm going to say extract base class. And then in this base class, I'm going to say response base, and I'm only going to take the links value, right? And notice that it is smart enough to not propose you the value itself. So I'm going to hit link and notice that a response base class is added. And over here, you can do your rest of the generic activity. So if you want to have different type of responses, you can create those responses, and inherit everything from response base. Right? So the response itself is going to deal with the activity, like student and university and instructors, but then things that are generic, they should be extracted out into something more common, that all the responses, they are going to look like this. And our controller is going to have that basic method, and this is the level 3 of developing application. Hypertext the link as the engine of application state, right? REST is about state transfer. Okay, so that was a previous lecture. REST is representational state transfer, but then who is doing that state transfer? Are you doing it through these URLs and the client is like very intelligent, right? Or you are giving options to the client, the API consumer, as to how to interact with the website, right? And I would recommend that if you are building web APIs, that you code at level 3. All right, so it is already 9:15 on the clock. Let's take a quick break. All right, guys, I'm back. Let's get started. So before we went on break, we looked at the Amazon website, and we identified that these websites, they are sending you two types of information. One is the data itself, and the second is a couple of links that you can interact with and work your way around interacting with the website. Because websites are created for human consumption, uh, the response that we received when we enter a URL, a website's URL, is an HTML document. The HTML document is going to have a lot of formatting, but uh, if you want to create a service, if you want to share the data with another application, like another computer, another program, you cannot use the same code. You will have to use web services. A web service is going to interact on the same application layer. It is going to be an HTTP call as well. But then the response that it comes back with is going to have only the data that can be consumed. It's not going to have the formatting and the UI styling and other things. Then we established that there are multiple ways in which you can interact with the site. You can